Good morning, everyone. Recognizing it is 11 o'clock, we're going to give people a few more minutes to join us on this Friday morning. Good to see some familiar names and faces. One thing that is nice about Greenwald's coffee breaks, if you haven't joined us before, they tend to be smaller groups. We absolutely encourage you to pop on video and audio if you're so inclined with questions and comments as we go. We'll save time at the end as well. Hey, Sharon, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Oh, seeing a nice group of familiar names and faces. Thanks, everyone. I'll give it one more minute, and Eric and I will get started. Cheers to all those who have their coffee or tea in hand. Happy Friday morning. My name is Lisa Greenwald with Greenwald Research. I'm happy to get started with our brief discussion today on our 2022 In-Plan Insights research results. If you didn't just hear me say it, we like having small groups. For these coffee breaks, we encourage you to pop on video or audio if you have questions or comments as we go. We'll also save some time at the end. I am joined today by someone you may know, my colleague, Eric Sondergeld. He and I ran the In-Plan Insights program together this year, and we're going to share some of the results and discuss with you. So I think we can pull up our deck. And I will give a brief overview of what the program includes. The In-Plan Insights program is an annual syndicated research program that Greenwald conducts. This was the second year we've done it. It is a multi-phase research program. We start every year with qualitative research, including focus groups with participants and IDIs with plan sponsors and plan advisors. Most of what we'll be presenting and sharing with you today, though, is the results of our surveys, one with just over 500 plan sponsors and one with just over 1,000 plan participants. The age range for our participants is 30 to 70. They had to have a personal income of 50,000 or more, so those are important to keep in mind. Our plan sponsors really run the gamut in terms of size with 50 or more lives. So, with that, I'm going to ask Eric to say hello and get us started talking about the interest that we found in in-plan income options.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning, everybody. So to start, we'll share a little bit about interest in in-plan income. And most employers feel a high degree of responsibility for their employees' retirement preparedness and the financial security of their retired employees. Very high numbers in both cases. In a similar way, but not quite as high, about half of participants feel that their employer should have a similar level of responsibility for their retirement preparedness, for the long-term financial security of their retired employees, and in helping employees generate a withdrawal strategy for retirement income. And more specifically, in retirement income, 9 in 10 sponsors agree that participants need in-plan income for a secure retirement, and most participants think that their employer should offer those options, 80%. So very, very strong interest and need in having these options. And then one last statistic from the participants is 9 in 10 wish their retirement plan had an option designed to generate a stream of income in retirement. So there's definitely a need and even a sense of responsibility for offering in-plan income.
And all of that positive openness and eagerness does not come without concerns and obstacles, as I know many of you know. So I'm going to walk through some of the things we heard, largely from sponsors, about concerns and obstacles. So this is one overview. Among sponsors claiming they were familiar with in-plan retirement income, the number one concern is ensuring the participants have an appropriate number of choices. Number two, at least on the net of extremely and very, is complexity. But complexity isn't even in the top 5 if you look at just that dark blue bar. Extremely concerned. And more on that in a minute, because we found complexity is a little more nuanced, more complex than we thought. The third largest concern is the reputation of annuities. Number 3 on the net, number 2. If you just look at top box. And then also popping out here is fiduciary liability concerns, fee concerns, and while it appears down there at the bottom, it's still more than 7 in 10, saying a lack of participant engagement in decision-making is a concern that sponsors have as they review and consider in-plan income options. I want to take some of these, the top 3, choice, complexity, and the reputation of annuities, in a little bit more detail. So for the second year in a row, we asked and agree, disagree with the statement that retirement income options are too complex for participants to understand, and participants got the same statement appropriately worded. And yes, most agree that they are too complex. Sponsors more likely to agree than participants, interestingly enough. But born out of our qualitative research and some of the things that we heard, we asked this question on the right, sort of a tolerance for complexity question. And what we see is participants are a little more likely to say the simpler, the better. But the vast majority say complexity is not going to be an issue if it can be explained well, either in written materials or by a person. And the one that really piqued our interest, and we heard it in the qualitative, which is why it appears here, is that for some smaller share of our sponsor and participant population, complexity is actually reassuring. That the options have been well thought through and developed to meet people's needs. So there's more nuance, I think, than we may have thought on complexity. The next one I want to talk about is the reputation of annuities. 78% of sponsors and half of our participants believe the reputation of annuities is going to make them reluctant, or their participants reluctant to consider an income option. But there is an important gap between sponsors and participants here. The sponsors are potentially overestimating the concern about annuities among participants. Related to that, we asked some questions about what to call these options on the next slide. We see that 8 in 10 sponsors said options with guaranteed lifetime income are going to be more appealing if we don't use the word annuity. But at the same time, nearly as many, 77%, agree that solution providers need to be calling these annuities instead of retirement income options. And most importantly is probably that purple box there in the middle. 8 in 10 of our sponsors want to learn more about how in-plan annuities are different. So next up on that list was choice. And it's something that we have seen consistently across both years of In-Plan Insights and that Greenwald has seen in other research it's conducted. Sponsors and participants want choice. They very consistently say that the right number of choices is somewhere in that 2 to 4 range, right? So, advisors tend to go even a little higher, 3 to 5 choices. Now, granted, that was 6 in-depths, but we've heard it consistently over 2 years. And choice poses a bit of a conundrum for automatic enrollment, which is on the next slide. And both our sponsors and our participants have very favorable views in our surveys to automatic enrollment. But the challenge now, of course, is reconciling choice and auto-enroll. And even though there's a strong favorability towards automatic enrollment, our research respondents may not be conceiving of it in the same way we as the industry are, because they're saying it should happen at age 50 or older. So these are some of the bigger challenges and concerns that we observed, and Eric's going to walk us through just a few findings that hint at things that might help.
Great. So I'm going to really share 3 things. One is some things that would help participants. The second is some things that would help plan sponsors. And the third is an idea that might help jumpstart this in a very big way, at least in my opinion. So the first is we asked participants how compelling they felt a whole series of statements were about in-plan income. This slide is showing 4 of them. The first one, and all of these were obviously people felt were at least somewhat compelling in very high numbers. The first one really is about the ability for employers to get better pricing, kind of group or bulk pricing. And that one received the most votes as being the most compelling. The second one really has to do with how people might compartmentalize how they think about their income and their investments for retirement. And they thought it was very compelling that you could kind of think separately about money that you use for income and then how you invest the rest of it. In fact, in the qualitative research, some participants came to that conclusion on their own. They said, if I put some money into one of these options, then I'm free to invest the rest of my money in a different way. The third one is really a message that the industry has been pushing for many, many years, is the concept of using lifetime income to cover your basic living expenses. Again, they felt that was very compelling. And then the final one, getting back to the A word that Lisa talked about a few minutes ago, is when we describe annuities in terms of how annuities are unique compared to any other vehicle out there, over 2/3 found that compelling as well. So messaging can play a big impact, a big role in how we present in-plan income and help convince participants to elect it when it's available. We also had a question for plan sponsors about what things would help their understanding of in-plan income, because one of the findings, we didn't really get into that today, is that plan sponsors are not really very aware of how these programs work. In fact, when they say they have in-plan income, the examples they give us are not in many cases. But the biggest thing that they're looking for is side-by-side comparisons. They want to see what's out there on the marketplace, and they really want to see that come from their plan advisor, but also from their record keeper. They're also looking for demand from participants before they consider adding an option. And this is one of the challenges within plan income, is both the plan advisors that we spoke with in the qualitative phase of this project and the plan sponsors are saying, well, as soon as plan participants are asking for this, then we'll do it. But plan participants are going to be the last ones to know about these options. So we really have to kind of reverse that thinking and start with the plan advisors and sponsors rather than wait for the plan participants. And I'm going to jump down 2 below that is a recommendation from your retirement plan consultant. So the plan sponsors are not only waiting for their participants, they're also waiting for their consultants, but the consultants are waiting for the participants. So we're kind of in this endless cycle of waiting for the participants to demand these options. And then the third thing I wanted to share in this section was an idea that could potentially make a big difference very quickly if some plan sponsors were adopted. Earlier, we talked about the sense of responsibility that plan sponsors feel over the financial security of their participants and their retirees. And we also know that many employers that have had traditional pensions in the past have either frozen them or taken them completely off their balance sheet because of funding challenges. But it sounds like the kind of that paternalistic attitude is still fairly strong among many employees, as we saw earlier. And so we asked a question that of participants if they would like an option that pensionizes their retirement savings. 60% agreed. Similarly, we asked both sponsors and participants if they'd be comfortable directing employer contributions to a guaranteed lifetime income solution, regardless of how participants directed their own contributions. Again, we received very high interest in that. About 8 in 10 sponsors and 2/3 of participants. One of the benefits of this option is it helps kind of bring back the pension in a new way without the funding challenges of traditional pension plans. And because in-plan income is really a 3-party sale, where you first have to convince plan advisors to present these and recommend these options to plan sponsors, then plan sponsors have to choose one or more options because they want choice. And then you have to educate and get participants to choose them. So one way to at least get some of this going is to take the participants out of that decision tree just for the moment and have the employer decide to add in-plan income in terms of how they invest their own contributions. And which is, I think, very interesting because when I began my career, it was very common for the employer contributions to go into company stock, which turned out to be a very risky thing and not good for a lot of participants. So maybe today we can get back to something like that, where the employer can have more say as to where their contributions get directed, but instead of in stock, into something that provides long-term value for their participants, such as income. I'm going to turn it back now to Lisa to give a quick summary, and then we can open up for Q&A.
Yeah, so with 4 phases of research, this obviously yields a lot of insights, a lot of thoughts. These are just some that Eric and I honed in on to give you an overview, and also ones that we found particularly interesting. There is high demand when you ask people if they want guaranteed lifetime income, and you can ask that question 8 ways from Sunday, and you're still going to see really big numbers for that. But there's nuance to it. The sponsors, and to a lesser extent, the participants, have concerns. They tend to hone in around choice and complexity and the reputation of annuities. I think for me, choice is a pretty important finding, and it's really the market, sponsors and participants, telling us as an industry that they want choice, and that's not what we're telling them for the most part. We're telling sponsors pick one, and participants pick one, and there's a real disconnect, I think, there. I think the views we're finding and hearing on the reputation of annuities are very interesting. And it's really making me rethink whether or not we should be using the A word. And I'm talking to our clients and our research sponsors about that. This high interest in pensionizing paired with the openness and the comfort level with employer contributions going to GLI, I think is a really fascinating idea. Sort of lower cost of entry, maybe fewer barriers. But we're also finding that the messaging really matters. And in fairness, we're well aware that we could say things in research with these messages that compliance is never going to let you guys say. But we're going to keep kicking the tires on the messaging. And I think what we've generally found is we're still in awareness building mode, I think, as an industry. And there is an eagerness to hear the story of how annuities have evolved, especially for the advisor and sponsor populations. One of those things, bottom of the list, but certainly not a low percentage of sponsors, said that one of the things that would help them is understanding how in-plan income options work. And, paired with that 8 and 10 who want to know how annuities have evolved and how they're different from the annuities that they may have in their head with a different reputation, certainly has me wondering about how we're telling this story for the sake of awareness, and wondering if in efforts to simplify, which may not be as important as we initially thought, that we're not really explaining these solutions very well. That's just a sprinkling of our thoughts on this. I'm curious to know reactions or questions.
Hi, this is great. This is Lewis from Empower. I'm just opening up with a really basic question, but just when we always talk about in-plan income options, so there's an understanding that it's always guaranteed, that they're always guaranteed annuity. Okay. And then secondly, when asked if, so having, the number of in-plan income options, so we're kind of, and the plan sponsors asked that, it's not including systematic withdrawal plans and all that. So it's kind of 3 or 4.
So yeah, let me clarify. I think there is a tendency to focus immediately on the GLI annuity solutions, but within the In-Plan Insights program, we test 4 concepts. They're not exact products, but 4 concepts. And one of them is a systematic withdrawal option. And we have also tested last year, and I think it's going to be coming back in 2023 in April, some managed account concepts as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
So this is Deb from LIMRA. When you say that they want choice, does that mean they want different types of fund options within the menu?
Yeah. So we asked why that number, and what we see is some generic one size does not fit all, but we also see this is asked after we show them 4 concepts. They want a choice of different approaches, right? Some that might have guarantees, some that don't. They were also shown an index linked option with upside potential and downside protection. So after seeing those 4 concepts, they say there are different approaches here we want to see. One size isn't going to fit all. And so I think what our participants and our sponsors are cluing in on through the research is putting a small suite of these, right? It's a tier. We lost the idea of a tier somewhere along the way. But a small suite with different approaches on the menu.
And I think there's a recognition that as people get closer to retirement, their situations become much different from each other than they are when they start their careers, where, the advice they get in a plan is to put in, contribute a lot and diversify your investments. And that's pretty standard advice. When someone gets closer to retirement, that advice has to become customized to the individual, and they realize that different people will have different income needs.
Yeah, I think that choice thing is just it's very interesting, having that different options. I mean, ultimately what's worked is QDIAs and having kind of that one default, getting people in there, and then, having obviously the tiers, make sense. But ultimately, if we go down that path, we're going to need perhaps obviously an advisor that can help them decide because of the complexity, or ultimately, are there, some tools that can be developed to identify which type of option would work for. Because ultimately, even though there's people, it seems like some people value that complexity, ultimately simplicity is what's going to drive adoption and actually people to take action, I think.
Now you're touching on a theme that is covered in the research, but wasn't today, is the need for education and advice, and how that education and advice is provided, and as well as tools that can help them make decisions about which option and how to think about income. One of the findings was that participants, especially when it comes to the advice piece of education and advice, they want access to a human to help them through that, which raises questions about how do you scale that piece of it, and which parts can you scale and use automated tools versus when it really makes sense to have a human available,
Right.
to work with participants.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the participants. The sponsors say human component is critical as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the choice thing to me is fascinating because, many of the companies who sponsored this research started off asking Eric and I to explore why no one is buying their perfect product, right? It's out there, we're doing it. Why is the uptake so low? And I'm wondering now, after looking at these results, if choice is part of the problem. If you pair a lack of familiarity and then this sort of aggressive insistence that you pick one and automatically enroll, I wonder at times if it's creating some paralysis that a suite or a tier may not.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, this is Chris Epstein. I think you're making incredibly valid points, and having operated on both the institutional and the retail side of the house, I think a couple of points are really important. On the institutional side, plan sponsors have historically hated annuities, and I think that's mostly driven by the costs associated with them and just a general lack of understanding of the value that they bring. On the retail side, if you get a good financial advisor to sit down with someone and explain an annuity, and now that there's more responsibility on the financial advisor side as it rests in terms of best interest, there's a little bit of more understanding and comprehension and willingness by an individual to consider an annuity. So I think that's an important evolution that's going on. I am sad that we haven't done enough to educate participants in a plan about what an annuity is and how it works, so that they can understand better. I think that goes also to, am I talking to, somebody on a managed account or a managed advice product, or am I actually able to walk into a kiosk somewhere and sit down and talk to an individual? How do I do that? Do I, as a plan sponsor, feel comfortable providing my employees access to an individual like that? Because am I compromising my fiduciary duty or somehow supporting this person, whatever? I think there's a lot of stuff going on here.
Yeah.
I also think in order for annuities to become more successful and more embraced, we have to really look at the fee structure, because unless you can hold on for a while, they are really expensive. So getting into an annuity at a certain point of time and then waiting it out so that the fees aren't so high, and then being able to draw the benefit from it, is really a critical component of the benefit of getting it, and also something that the individual has to really understand why it would work for them.
Right.
Hi, Lisa, this is Drew from Northern Trust. I have a question about the naming conventions. I heard you mention that referring to them as annuities might not be optimal. Have you done any research about what you might refer to them as alternatively?
So this is the first year we really started to play around with naming. It was born out of last year when we thought we had described very well what retirement income options were, and yet found that people were still misunderstanding us. And we wanted to dive a little deeper into how much reluctance was coming from the A word specifically, even if we didn't say it. And a couple interesting things happened just in the course of a year. In doing the qualitative research, Eric and I heard far more volunteered negative reactions to annuities. So that seemed to lessen, pretty much with the exception of like one very anti-annuity advisor, Christina, to your point. That seemed to lessen. So this year in the quant, as you see, we started to say, like, should we call these annuities instead of retirement income options? And a majority agreed with us. I think there's so many names floating out there, right? For these solutions, you've got each individual product name, but even as a category, you've got income solutions, retirement income solutions, guaranteed lifetime income solutions, protected income solutions, that we may be confusing the market without having sort of a good universal name and story behind it still.
Sounds like a theme we'll want to explore again this year.
Sounds like we're going to be doing more this year.
And maybe the end result is kind of brainstorming here, is that we call them retirement income solutions, but within that, maybe there are annuity solutions and non-annuity solutions, right? Like the one of the four that we offered this year was an automatic withdrawal strategy modeled after the 4% solution, if you're familiar with that. And the other three were all annuities. So there are certainly non-annuity solutions. There are funds that are built for income with suggested withdrawal rates from them, right? So there are a variety of ways you can build income without an annuity. Now, when we did give people the descriptions of these options, we did avoid the use of the annuity because we wanted to describe what they do and not what we might call them. And then we later tested their reaction to the concept of annuities.
Yeah, so when we were talking about annuity solutions, we very consistently used guaranteed lifetime income. And then we did have some questions about specific to guaranteed lifetime income solutions, which was 3 out of our 4 solutions, at least partial. And then we save all the annuity stuff for the end. We don't want to taint anyone's views or bias anyone. But then we introduced the annuity concept and explained that's what they really were. And both in the qualitative and in the quant, it's not as much of a turnoff as I think we once thought it was. And I don't know if that's generational shift or industry messaging, maybe hopefully sinking in. But it's changing. It feels like it's changing.
You find that participants and individuals on the consumer side might not really understand what an annuity is, or have the same negative impression?
I'm sure
We
that's
see dramatic differences by age.
But I think there are lots of people who don't understand annuities, and the negative connotation some might have in their head may be very non-specific. It might be something they heard or someone told them at some point, and that's stuck in their head. But if you ask them to describe it, maybe they can't. Now, we did hear from in the qualitative research from a couple plan sponsors that had concerns about annuities, but mainly from a portability perspective. Like one was felt like they were stuck with their current record keeper because they had some annuities and they couldn't switch. Now, the Secure Act is supposed to help with that portability, but that message hadn't gotten through to that particular sponsor, and maybe the industry hasn't hasn't kind of adapted yet enough to be able to port these things from plan to plan. I want to just quickly, since I mentioned this, oh, go ahead, Deb, I'm sorry. Well, since I mentioned the Secure Act, there's a question that Sharon asked in the chat about going back to directing employer match to guaranteed income, how that might work with highly compensated employees to a Roth. And I actually haven't given that any thought yet, but it's a good question. There is, just FYI, there's a blog on our website that I wrote on this idea about having employer contributions going into guaranteed life or into an income option. But I didn't explore the challenges in doing so. It was more of an idea and that there's interest.
Well, everyone, we're at time. We so appreciate you being here with us and having interest in this research. Hard to believe, but we're going to be kicking off 2023 before you know it. We start in April with kickoff calls with our sponsors. There's an early bird discount on sponsorship for the study that ends at the end of this month. If you're interested, please let Eric or I know, or you can submit through the website. This coffee break recording, as well as all of our past ones, is also available on our website. And the release information, Eric's blog, is also all available at Greenwald Research /In-Plan Insights. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
You as well.
Thank you.